Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. Nice to meet you. The Smoko podcast is the place to celebrate and highlight women, trans women, and non binary folk working within STEM and trade occupations. So please tune in, take a break, and join us. We are on Smoko. And today we're extremely lucky to be joined by two lovely people, Makenna Kuzyk and Jana Gebara, who are both mechanical engineering students at the University of Alberta. They are both the founder and the co-project manager of Mission Spacewalker. And today we're going to talk about their projects at the university with Mission Spacewalker. We're also going to talk about a couple of their projects in the greater space industry of Canada with the Canadian Space Agency. We're going to talk about their passions of all things space sustainability, extreme environments, and robotics and technology. So I'm so excited to have this conversation. We're going to kind of go all over the place. And just thank you, Makenna and Jana, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
To start us off, I know you guys are both currently completing your undergraduate degrees in mechanical engineering. I was wondering if we could go back to how you chose this field of study. And then, if you have one, what specialty of mechanical engineering are you guys the most passionate about?
Did you want us to just go back and forth, kind of?
Yeah, however you would like.
Okay, sure. So, how I chose mechanical engineering, it actually started when I was pretty young. I was fortunate to have a dad who was both an engineer and a space enthusiast. So, we would stare at the stars late at night and we'd look for the International Space Station. And I remember telling him I wanted to go be on the International Space Station, and he always encouraged me in my curiosity all the way through high school. And when I was in high school, still kind of chasing that dream of going to the stars and building things, I opened the view book for the University of Alberta and saw a girl in there wearing a spacesuit. Her name's Abby Laxon. She was actually a mentor to me when I first came to the University of Alberta, but I reached out to her and she pretty much convinced me to go into mechanical engineering at the University of Alberta, and I'm so glad that I did. I got a lot of really cool opportunities and met a lot of really cool people, so that's kind of what made me pursue mechanical engineering. And being here now, a specialization that I really like, definitely space, but I also found a love for research and flight testing.
Cool.
So I really love those kind of aspects of both aerospace and space.
I think my story is a little different than Makenna's. So the first time that I ever found interest, I guess, in space and engineering at the same time was actually when I was in junior high and I was watching a TV show called The 100. And it's essentially about a society or a post-apocalyptic society living in space on a station. And they send 100 people down to see if the world is still habitable. And one of the main characters, Raven Reyes, was actually a space mechanic who also did a lot of things that related to engineering, and that kind of influenced me to look deeper into it. And I kind of held on to that dream as I went through high school and, applied at the University of Alberta for first year engineering. And then from there, I really chose mechanical, not only because of that, but also just the versatility of the study and the different things that you can do with a mechanical engineering background, especially in the context of space. For specialties, I'd say a big one is space, particularly in the study of remote sensing, where the engineering meets the science, especially when exploring things like climate change and the global changes that we're currently experiencing in the world. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. I love both of those answers so much. I love, Makenna, I love that answer that it was something that you could tell that there's so much love there, and you could tell that you grew up with that with your dad, and that really is special kind of personal moment of looking at the stars and being like, okay, where is the International Space Station? And I'm going to go there. And that's so beautiful to have that mentor from a young kid, and also to be like, yeah, of course you are. You're going to get it to the space station, and then meeting somebody at the University of Alberta that can be a mentor and a representation. A woman astronaut really, really young is a beautiful thing in your story. And then I love your story, Jana, that it is the opposite of, but I think it also kind of harps back to the power of science fiction. And I think it's so common in these spaces that I think you meet a lot of scientists and you meet a lot of engineering to be like, how did you get into this? To be like, well, I actually read a bunch of sci-fi as a kid, and it really affected me. And I kind of realized that there was a different world out there and exploration and this bigger thing of space. So I think that's so beautiful that it's like two ends of the spectrum. One's very personal and one's very almost stereotypical of sci-fi and escapism, but the fact that it both got you to where you are now and both in this program. When you guys mentioned your specialty, could we maybe talk a little bit about that? Like, what would actual flight testing look like for you, Makenna? And then when you talk about remote sensing, Jana, what does that actually mean for people who are maybe not in this field? Like, what would the structure of that actually look like?
So, on the topic of flight testing, I was fortunate to work at the National Research Council Flight Research Laboratory in Ottawa, and that was probably one of the coolest experiences I'd ever had. And it started with us flight testing on our own through Mission Spacewalker. So,
Cool.
project that we did was the robotic experiment that we flew in microgravity. We wanted to study how the robot wheels that we created through electroadhesion could stick. Electroadhesion is a little bit complex, but in simple terms, we're using a high voltage to create a static field that makes it sticky. So same way a balloon, when you rub it on your hair, sticks to your hair, we're creating that with high voltage, and we're putting that
cool.
on the wheels of a robot.
So
and we want to see, yeah, it was pretty cool. And we wanted to see how in microgravity it would stick, because if you envision the International Space Station, we were envisioning robots that didn't need to be tethered, or like the Canadarm be stuck to the International Space Station. So we built this experiment and took it in microgravity, where we went on the Falcon 20 aircraft. It basically goes up in 2G, and then it's kind of falling a little bit out of the sky, kind of counteracting the 1G force you're feeling towards the Earth, and you float. So it's kind of the same thing that happens, on the International Space Station. The International Space Station is constantly falling towards Earth, and it allows people to float and do microgravity research. So that was our first taste of flight testing. Basically, what it involves is you create a mission plan, and then you get results and data from that, and then you analyze it after. Same thing, that's the same kind of thing I did at the NRC, but this time we were testing how to make a helicopter autonomous. So this is also really interesting. It's more acronyms. Space loves acronyms. So it's the CVLAD project, the Canadian Vertical Lift Autonomy Demonstration. And we would take up our software. It would determine where we go, where to land. And of course, we'd have safety pilots, but same thing that we did on the Falcon 20. You make a mission plan, you collect data, and then you analyze it afterwards. And then I'll hand it to Jana to talk about remote sensing.
Yeah, so I guess in the context of remote sensing, that would look like utilizing different sensors on either airborne platforms, things like drones, helicopters, planes, to study. It's usually, either land or the ocean, and that it can be in the context of either changes or even animals. But the other side of it is also space-borne remote sensing. So that's on a platform like a satellite. So having the sensor on the satellite or on any of these platforms and being able to study things that would be harder to reach if you were to do it by foot or by boat. So something or just studying things that are a little bit more complex, where you need that additional, platform to do that. So yeah,
very cool. And just to one more kind of follow up on that, Jana, is for your actual data. What are you looking at? Are you looking at like temperature? Are you guys looking at pressure? Are you taking photos? What type of data are you actually collecting?
Yeah, for remote sensing, it can be any of those. It's very diverse, and the method that you go about it will get you different things. There are a lot of sensors that just rely on, taking images and processing them. And there are others that you can do similar to what we're developing through our project at Mission Spacewalker, where we're actually developing an environmental sensor to study albedo, which is essentially the ratio of the reflected energy from the Earth, or the incoming energy from the Earth, and what's reflected by the different terrains, as well as sensors that explore the atmospheric content. So things like CO2 and just general humidity and temperature.
Very cool. Very, very, very cool. Thank you guys for going into depth a little bit, just because I think it's so important to define things, especially if you're not within this field, if you're not within space, because you're like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. But then when you like actually hear it, to be like, no, you went in microgravity and you like tested a robot that you created, and you guys are creating these amazing sensors to put on a satellite. Like that's all of a sudden the impact of kind of like what you guys are doing. It sounds super simple when you just explain it kind of offhandedly to be like, that's my specialty. But the impact that this research has is pretty outstanding and pretty incredible. I don't know if we've already answered this question, if this is maybe in your specialty, but anything that you've learned within your mechanical engineering degree that you think has maybe fundamentally impacted you or changed the way that you view the world?
I guess I'll look at it in a kind of broader perspective. I think mechanical engineering has definitely influenced the way I think about the everyday things that we interact with. And I think it really does expose you to a different, I guess, thought process that you normally wouldn't have without really going into the details of some of the systems that we interact with. I think for me personally, a really big one is kind of the risk and safety that goes into the everyday processes that we interact with.
Yeah, I guess for engineers, I learned that we have quite a big responsibility. We're basically tasked with building a better future, which I think is really cool, but also, like Jana said, requires a lot of safety and risk management, which is something that I really learned through my undergraduate degree. And playing off of what Jana said, I definitely think it makes you question the world around you. I remember when I was in my physics class and my teacher, we were learning about polarizing sunglasses. And she asked us, the class, do you guys know how your sunglasses work? And no one knew how they worked. And she was saying how you guys should start questioning the world around you. It's you have to. This is how we make a better future, by questioning the world around you. And back to our analog project, when we were forming the citizen research project, the one Jana talked about on the Athabasca Glacier, we're collaborating with Max, who works at Rockaboo Mountain Adventures, and he was telling us how we implemented these little experiments that he was doing with the people that went on their excursions. And he was saying how there was this little boy who just wanted to take samples from every single pond, the temperature, and investigate it. And that's the kind of curiosity that we need in not only engineers, but for everyone to make a better future. So I think that was really emphasized through engineering.
I think that's a really good answer. And thank you for kind of taking it a little bit broad and talking about maybe the responsibility of being an engineer and what does that actually mean in terms of society and what is your role of an engineer. And I think sometimes maybe what could be lost is I think when people first think engineer, they're like, oh, yeah, somebody who's good at math. And to know the actual responsibility and what you guys can create. All structures are created by an engineer at some point, whether that's like water, buildings, anything, roads, right? So it is a huge kind of risk and safety problem. So thank you for taking it there, because I think maybe that's something that gets lost sometimes. When I was researching you guys, I thought what was so cool is at first I thought this was only going to be a conversation about space. And then I was so surprised and like pleasantly surprised that it was also going to be a conversation about sustainability and robotics. And I was wondering, when you talk about these kind of three passions that you guys both have, do you view these topics as independent or do you view them as co-related? Because I think maybe from an outsider, you think that they would be completely independent from each other and that they wouldn't be actually related. And in terms of kind of study or project, like what does that intersection really look like in practice or look like within the industry?
Yeah, I think they're definitely correlated. One thing that's thrown around a lot in the mechanical engineering or engineering in general is interdisciplinary. And it's not just in engineering, it's also, my sister's in nursing, and I could say hers is very interdisciplinary because she has to learn all of these different types of skills to learn how to take care of human. And it's the same thing for engineers when they try to take care of the world or society. They have to consider a lot of different factors. Right now, we're talking about robotics and space. Those definitely do go together. If we think about the Canadarm on the International Space Station, you can't just build an arm and then throw it in space and hope that it works. Same thing with the Ingenuity drone. A lot of people might not realize, but when they were testing it here on Earth, the atmosphere is a lot different on Mars. So they actually had to go into all this effort to try and replicate what they think the atmosphere would be like on Mars to see if the drone would actually fly. So I think all these considerations, collaborations between fields, not just within engineering, like for our experiment building a robot, we had to learn electrical to, make the hardware,
Yeah.
software to actually code the motors to run, and then mechanical to 3D print everything so that it all came together. But also engineering mixed with other disciplines. So we have people on our team, for example, one's a psychologist, and she's really focused on the human factor side of space and how our team works together during missions. So I would say it's definitely not one specialty. I think to be an engineer, it's really important to be well-rounded. But I'll hand it to Jana to give her insight.
Yeah, I definitely think Makenna nailed it right on the head in terms of the interdisciplinary nature of a lot of topics, especially outside of engineering. And I think on this discussion in terms of sustainability, especially, I really don't think the topic of sustainability in general is ever really independent to any topic, whether that's space or robotics. So I definitely think there are factors in every kind of sector. Same thing, I think, for space and robotics. I think Makenna did a pretty good job of summing that up. But yeah, I definitely don't think sustainability is ever really an independent topic.
No, I think that's a good call out. And thank you guys for kind of diving into it, because I do think that, I don't know, maybe on first glance, you don't think of them as codependent or as interdisciplinary. And I think that maybe you can get kind of stuck in definitions or stuck in terms. So thank you for talking about the fact that it's interdisciplinary. On your personal projects, when you're talking about like creating your robotics or doing your Athabasca Glacier or trying all of a sudden these new skills that you have to learn how to code, and do you rely on your team and other people within Mission Spacewalker? Do you go to different departments? How did you guys find that process of all of a sudden maybe learning something a little bit outside of your comfort zone? How was that?
I can start. I think in terms of the, I guess, like the multidisciplinary nature of the project that we did with the electrical to software, mechanical, I definitely think that teamwork makes the dream work. Everyone has a different skill set and everyone approaches a problem in a different way. So I really do think that when it comes to bigger projects like this or just projects in general, relying on your team is a huge part of it. I think in terms of learning everything, it's really nice and very cool to see everyone kind of take on something that maybe they're not particularly well versed in, but they do have an interest in. So relying on resources, advisors, and just collaboration in general is definitely a huge factor.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I guess a funny story is when I first founded Mission Spacewalker, I wasn't really sure what project to do, but I knew I wanted to do something robotics, microgravity. So I went on LinkedIn and I messaged a bunch of people who were kind of doing certain things that I thought were interesting. One guy, his name is Daniel, and we talked about Spider-Man and how he sticks on walls, and that kind of formed into electroadhesion. We were talking about adhesive technologies, and I learned a lot from talking to him. And I think it's really important to learn from people. Everyone has something to teach you, even through our team. Like Jana has taught me a lot about leadership, for example, with us being co-presidents, and then our advisors, Samioda and Rick, really helping us with the technical side. But not only that, at a conference I was at, and I was talking to Lisa Campbell, the president of the CSA, and she is so engaging. She's an incredible public speaker, and she really listens to you. And I asked her how she's such an incredible public speaker. And she said that every single person has something to teach her, whether it's the Uber driver on her way here or the people speaking at the conference. And that really hit me hard in everything, because every single person you can learn something from, whether it's good or bad. So I think that's something that our team really does as well. We all respect each other and our thoughts and know that we all bring something important to the table.
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's such fantastic answers. And thank you for talking about like kind of the true teamwork and the true collaborative nature, I think, of science and engineering, and talking about how you can learn from everybody. And I think that openness to learn, I think, is really, really powerful. And I think it speaks to both of you. But I think that's wonderful that it wasn't even like a negative to be like, oh yeah, like it might have been difficult or it took some learning curve. It was just like, yes, this is what it is. And we had to talk to our peers and we could learn from our team. And I think that is extremely refreshing that it was so positive and so collaborative focused. I think that's really cool. I didn't want to kind of dive in a little bit to one project, and I think we briefly mentioned it or we touched on it, and it's the Athabasca Glacier Project. And when I was researching you guys, what I thought was really cool and maybe a little bit different was this like passion for innovative solutions, but really these solutions from extreme environments. And I know that you guys have both studied the ocean, space, and the Arctic, and glaciers as well being one of that main project. From an engineering perspective, could you kind of explain to people why extreme environments are so interesting and what can they show you in terms of innovation and new solutions?
Definitely. So I guess in terms of extreme environments, the really cool thing and I guess like the most exciting part of it is just the complexity of it. Engineering in general is super complex and you're always coming across problems that may be harder, but it being an extreme environment just takes it to the next level. So there's a lot of room for innovation and I think just research and development in general. So there's always new solutions that are needed and kind of room for growth. And it's really interesting when we talk about space. I think that particular extreme environment, a lot of people, have trouble translating, the research that goes into there. Well, how does that help us? But researching that extreme environment can lead to different technologies that can help us actually here on Earth when it comes to things like natural disasters or just hazard mitigation. And so a lot of the technologies that are being developed in terms of these extreme environments are really applicable in our everyday lives as well.
Yeah, I think from my end, in terms of extreme environments, we grow a lot from challenges, and extreme environments are a big challenge. And I think a lot of times that's why we do analog missions for astronauts, for example. Chris Hadfield's Guide to Being an Astronaut, a book he wrote, was really instrumental in me forming a passion for analog research because he talked about this one example where they're pushing a sled in like northern Quebec. It's super cold, but it's a time for him and his team members or mission members to start forming bonds with each other and really building that trust that they can work together. I know I always say like everything is astronaut training, and one thing I always say is astronaut training is my jiu-jitsu. So I would say that's kind of an extreme environment when someone has your arm behind your back and like it's very uncomfortable, but it has taught me a lot about how I react to stress, how I react to challenges, maybe not being in the most comfortable position and being comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think extreme environments are a way for us to learn about ourselves and also the way we interact with other people. So it's a good way to build trust, communication, especially, and just interpersonal skills and leadership.
Ooh, big answers, you two. That's fantastic. I don't even know where to start. That was both fantastic answers to that. It almost kind of sounds like with an extreme environment, you're putting the cart before the horse a little bit, that you have no idea what to expect. And because of that, you have no idea what you're going to discover in terms of innovation. Like, you brought it back to maybe in this extreme environment, it might seem very, very niche, but you have no idea what you are going to discover. And it can be used in kind of a variety of different sectors and different subfields. But then it also kind of sounds like it could be, like Makenna brought it back to almost a personal training and all about teamwork and collaboration and more structure of your team. And you're dealing with something that you have no idea what you're going to expect. And so you kind of have to just deal with the unknown and constant changes, kind of like with field work, that everything is going to go wrong at all times and you have no idea what's going to happen. When you guys are talking about a couple things, if we could define them, could you describe what an analog experiment is or an analog mission, and maybe what's the opposite of analog if you're not doing an analog mission? And then in terms of data or in terms of science, what are you actually looking for from an extreme environment, or does that change mission to mission?
So an analog mission is kind of preparing you for a real mission. I feel like it when we take it in context, it's different for every context you put it in. For an astronaut, an analog mission underwater, scuba diving, doing things on a replica of a ship in a giant pool would be analogous to them doing it in space. So that's what we mean by analog mission. It's analogous to them doing it in space. But we could do analog missions, like for us, it's more of an analog mission testing our mission objectives, our research, and then taking it back to the Athabasca Glacier. So in our context, it's more testing our devices, our procedures to apply them to the Athabasca Glacier, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like a simulation in real life.
Okay.
The results, and the results we're trying to get, I'll let Jana talk more on the technical side because she's leading a lot of our sensor development. But I'll talk a little bit more on the human factor side. We're trying to create these procedures or this mission plan that can be replicated later. This is something our team hasn't done before. And I think human factors is really important because it can determine a project's success or failure. So whether or not we can actually set up our foldable turbine might determine whether we can get any energy out of it. So that it comes back to communication and how we work together. But I'll let Jana talk about her insight.
Yeah, I think in terms of what an analog mission is, I think that definition is definitely good. It is essentially just a simulated environment that allows you to train or just go through your procedures somewhere on Earth, at least in the context of space, on Earth before you take it to space. I think for our analog mission that we're currently trying to design on the technical side of things, so I guess the experiment is very multifaceted, and we've essentially broken it down into 4 different sectors. So the first one that I think we've talked about quite a bit now is the development of a sensor. So the specific sensor, again, just a modular dual sensor that will study 2 different things. One of them being the albedo as well as the atmospheric contents that we talked about. And then Makenna briefly touched on it, is a collapsible turbine. And the idea there is that we set that up and hopefully are able to generate enough power to actually power our whole experiment. So actually charging the battery that we use in the sensor we're developing while we're on this field campaign. And then the third part of it we also touched on is the human factor portion. So how do we work together as a team? What are the effects of being on a field campaign for, X amount of days? In our case, it'll be 5 during our CanArcs run this summer. Bringing that all into just a database. So the data that we're really hoping to collect in terms of the science is comparing 2 different environments and hoping to actually come to a consensus on kind of the changes that are happening, especially on the Athabasca Glacier itself. And then we want to turn this into a platform where others can actually go on and learn about it themselves and not just give a bunch of numbers, but also just process them so that they're easily digestible and others who may not be well versed in that sector can also learn about.
To quickly add to what Jana was saying on the glacier, if you've ever been to the Athabasca Glacier, there's these signs that show where the glacier was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and it's constantly receding. And that's really worrying. So that's kind of what we're focused on. We want to increase public awareness on our glaciers, but also give people a goal or something that they can do to contribute to this research. So that's also something we're focused on.
Thank you for kind of going into it a little bit in more detail. And I love that public context to be able to bring the public in and to kind of almost turn it into STEM education a little bit, to have the data, to present the data, but to also process it, to be like, why does this matter? What are we actually looking at? Are we looking at temperature? Are we looking at like a LiDAR scan? Are we looking at whatever? And then what does this actually mean? So why is this data important to you? What does it actually mean in terms of the glacier receding? I think that's so fantastic. And I think that it's really cool that you did bring in the team kind of collaborative nature. Again, very similar to this entire conversation. I think a theme has been collaboration. But I know from my experience of whenever our expeditions, whenever they would succeed or fail, it was largely because of people. It wasn't really data or storms or what have you. It was usually if we could follow our SOP and if we could also get along. And I think sometimes maybe the public doesn't realize how important getting along or being able to effectively communicate with your team and complete your expedition. How has that gone in terms of teamwork and collaboration? Has there been challenges there? Have there been something that you've had to learn about yourselves and learn about the team, or anything surprising there in terms of teamwork?
Yeah, I definitely think there's always learnings that you can get from teamwork, at least like collaborative environments for sure. I think more recently we actually recently had a meeting where we were going over kind of the things that we've received feedback on and ways that we can make it easier for new members to get situated on our team, and how they can be caught up to speed and kind of go over, our designs or get feedback in general. So I think there's definitely challenges in that aspect, but it's really nice to be a part of a team that prioritizes making sure everyone feels comfortable and making sure everyone is getting the support they need to be getting the most out of the project itself. So I think the challenges change, but I think that's a more recent one. Is
I guess a funny story I always think about when I think about our team and teamwork is the night before our first flight, our camera just died. It was horrible. It was a pie cam. So yeah, we didn't, it was really cool because a lot of our team members didn't really stress about it. We were like, okay, what can we do? What can we do next? How can we solve this? So as a team, instead of panicking, we really tried to find the solution. And we drove all over Calgary to try and find a cheap little webcam with the help of Sharuk, one of the NRC staff. He helped us solder a new lens on it.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and it was like the night before the flight, and we ended up being completely fine. The camera did get data, but it really went to show that our team was capable of tackling these very intense challenges. And I remember thinking, wow, I really hope I get to go to space with these people, because these are the kind of people I want to go to space with. And I think the team has also showed us not only our capabilities, but also that people have a vision of what they want it to look like. I guess what I'm getting at is I observed a lot of leaders when I was going through my internships. And one of the leaders, her name's Hira, she founded the Zenith Fellowship, which is available for all undergraduate students. But one thing she always talks about when you're a fellow is how she wants us to make it even better than she made it. And I remember thinking, how is that even possible? You made something so cool. How am I going to do it better? But she genuinely believes in her fellows doing even better and going even bigger. And that, I guess, confidence is kind of what I try to instill in our members. I want them, when, Jana and I graduate, to make Mission Spacewalker what their vision of beautiful, inclusive space looks like. So that's another big part of, I think, our team.
That's fantastic. No, thank you guys. Thank you for going there and talking about the team. And I love that vision for the future of Mission Spacewalker. And maybe that brings us to the next one, is just, we've talked a lot around Mission Spacewalker, but I don't think we've actually defined it. And I was wondering if we could take that time just to define what your organization is, kind of your mission, and any other projects that we haven't talked about yet that are really like upcoming and you're super excited about.
So Mission Spacewalker is primarily an undergraduate student group at the University of Alberta. We were founded in response to the Canadian Reduced Gravity Experiment Challenge, where we made our robotics experiment. But it turned into a lot more than that, I'm sure, as you've gathered from this conversation. It's focused a lot on creating opportunities for women and gender diverse individuals. Mission Spacewalker had the opportunity to present our club and our values actually at the United Nations Space for Women conference, where we talked about inclusion, diversity in the space industry, and how Mission Spacewalker is focused on leaders. And this is really important because our club believes in making leaders, because leaders inspire more leaders, which inspire more leaders. So it's a butterfly effect, really. So we want our team members to develop skills in interdisciplinary, all facets of engineering. And psychology, we have other students bringing in different expertise that we can all learn from. And one of the projects I guess we haven't touched on is one of our members is leading a stratospheric balloon competition experiment. Yeah, so she's focused on creating a deployable solar array, which is really cool because solar power is really important, especially for space travel. So she is kind of taking the lead with that project, and it's really cool for Jen and I to see, because that's exactly what we envisioned for the club, is for our members to kind of have a vision and then run with it and make the space industry kind of what they're envisioning it to be. But I'll let Jana add to that?
I think we've done a really good summary already through our conversation about the kind of projects, but yeah, I think the Mission Spacewalker is really just that platform that we hope to continue on and just continue to elevate the interests here at the University of Alberta, especially in the context of the Albertan space industry. And I think really allowing people who are minorities in science, technology, engineering get that platform and be able to contribute a project that they may otherwise not have had the chance to, or maybe didn't feel comfortable enough to do it in a different space. So I think really continuing to foster that space for everyone. Yeah.
I love
Also,
that.
I didn't say her name, but her name is Krista. Her name is Krista, and she's leading Atmotech. That's the Stratosphere Balloon project.
Fantastic. No, I love that. I love the Atmotech, and I love that project. And I saw that actually on your website, and I was like, that is so cool that she's making this stratosphere balloon. I think that's absolutely incredible. But I love what you guys just said. And I think Jana nailed it in terms of kind of bringing home the independence and like creating a platform for them, and that they can take it however they would like to, and to have that next generation, that next leader. And I think that's really, really cool and very rare in an organization. And you can see it if you have members that are going off and creating their own project and something really interesting and really new in the space industry. I think you guys are doing your job in spades and like changing it to how you guys would like to see it and better represent the community already within space industry, and maybe a community that isn't as represented as it should be. In terms of representation, I mean, you guys do amazing work in DEI, and I wanted to maybe take a moment to talk about maybe some biases or maybe some barriers to entry, because I think sometimes when young women think about the space industry, they might think of it as very male populated, maybe not designed for them in mind. Do you guys have any advice for young women who are wanting to enter the space industry but maybe a little bit scared to? And then maybe related to this, was there something that you had to personally overcome on your journey of pursuing kind of space science? Like maybe this was a bias or mindset or a really hard course. Was there anything that you felt that you had to overcome to be like, okay, yep, I've made it. I'm entered the space industry. This is this is me.
Yeah. For the first part of the question, in terms of advice, I think the big thing is that right now there isn't as huge as a bias. I think for a lot of others, there's been a lot of work towards making just STEM in general a lot more inclusive, and I think we're definitely starting to see those changes as the time goes by. And I think even in the last 5 years of being in engineering, I've completely seen it change. It's really nice to see, especially in the earlier year classes, just the demographics that might be minorities in my cohort not really be the case anymore. So I think in terms of bias, I think that a lot of people are definitely putting effort to change that, and we're definitely seeing the effects. In terms of advice, I would say honestly, just go for it. I think that there's a lot of platforms out there that, like Mission Spacewalker, that are working to elevate those who are interested, and I think finding that community is super important. I guess on the personal side of things, I'll talk a little bit, I guess, about the mindset. I think a lot of people struggle with this, but for me, is imposter syndrome. So being able to navigate that, I think, both in the context of space, but also engineering, has definitely been a journey. And I think for me at this point, I don't think I've had that aha moment yet, but I think it's coming. I think it's coming. Yeah.
I think for me, I grew up with a really strong, independent mom, and she really wanted to instill those values in me. And one analogy she always used when we were growing up is, we all have a flame, a light, and we want to be able to shine as bright as we can, and we don't want people to dim our light. So, that's taking care of yourself, pursuing what you're really passionate about, because that's when you shine the brightest. And I think a notable time when I was a little bit worried about my light was when I started basketball. I would go after school to the gym by my house, and I was the only girl, and I would play. I felt a lot of pressure, but I would still show up. And it got to the point where people would call me the girl. I'm not bothering to know my name, because the way I was identified was the girl.
The girl.
Yeah, because no other girls were there. And I remember playing, and then this other girl came and she started playing, and she was saying how seeing someone else playing every day despite the biases empowered her to start playing too. And she was incredible. She scored like, I don't even know how many points, but I remember when she first walked onto the court, I heard guys kind of snickering at her, not wanting to play as hard, but by the end they had to guard her because she was going to score. So I think that really showed me that if you, even though it's uncomfortable, if it's somewhere that's going to make your light brighter, other people will see it, and it could also encourage them to maybe pursue things that they might not have before. So my advice would be, kind of your passion, what you like, and don't let anyone, I guess, dim that light that's inside of you.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you for both two beautiful answers. And I think like two pieces of advice that I think make it a little bit less scary. And I think it just brings it down a notch. I think sometimes maybe probably similar to an imposter syndrome. And I know that that's such a common one. It's something that I've struggled with as well. And some days I think I've gotten my aha moment, and some days it comes back, right? I think that that's just unfortunately kind of common within these spaces and these industries that are really, really difficult. But thank you for bringing kind of some advice that makes it less scary and less intimidating and really simplifies it to be like, just go for it. You're passionate about it. Don't dim your light. Like, you got this. And even if you struggle within it, you're probably going to help somebody, and just stay with it. Stay with it for a little bit, because that person's probably right behind you, right? Like, it always kind of seems scary and daunting when you're alone, but yeah, you being a representative and being the first and a pioneer within that space, somebody's right behind you, which is pretty beautiful to see. On that, and this will be the last one because I know that we're almost at time, is just, I think from afar, from just like Instagram and just social media, it's been pretty incredible to see the amount of young women that are entering the space industry. And I feel like right now there's this energy behind the space industry and about young women becoming astronauts and this next generation of space exploration. In terms of space and or EDI, they can be one and the same, or they can be separate. What's something that's exciting to you, and what's something that's on your radar is kind of like the next big thing, and what you guys are really stoked to see?
Yeah, I think I can start. I think in terms of space and EDI, I think something that recently happened that's super exciting to see is the first Canadian woman astronaut being called for her mission. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I think one of the big topics that I've come across is also being in the space industry and also motherhood, and seeing how that goes into play. So that's a really big topic that I'm really excited to continue to hear about and continue to see, I guess, the discourse and how boundaries will be broken, and how, I guess, the mindset is, or the broader mindset will change. I think it's super important, not only in the space context, but the context
Science.
of higher education and science. So yeah, definitely those conversations.
Yeah, I think Jana brings up a good point in terms of family. I remember when I was young thinking I wanted to be an astronaut, I wasn't sure if family and going to space had a correlation, but we look at, as Jana said, Jenny Seide, she's going to space and she's a family, and the head of the astronaut corps really encourages our astronauts to have families because it's really important. And I think that's a really cool issue that we haven't talked a whole lot about, is that family is really important for your life. And then if I was to keep tabs, I'm definitely going to be keeping tabs on Jana, because
love that
she's
answer.
really incredible. Yeah, I think like when she came into Mission Spacewalker, she really pushed it on a whole nother direction. She worked a lot on our constitution when it comes to EDI. So I think her vision for space is a really beautiful one. So I'm excited to see where she takes it with that. But also really all of our members, they're so incredible. And every time I talk to them or hear their future plans, it makes me really excited. And so I think my peers, my mentors, I'm excited to see what they do in the space industry.
Oh my goodness, guys. Every single answer is so cute and so beautiful and well spoken. Like that's a gorgeous, gorgeous couple answers. And I love that conversation and that maybe change of mindset in terms of motherhood in space. I know geology and oceanography, we had the same conversation. I think we're still having the same conversation. I think it's one that's bigger in terms of all STEM, but also trades and just in general in society, I think of motherhood and that balance, but especially in these extreme environments and these remote environment settings, I think it's really, really important. So that's really cool to see that we now have representation of a mom and an astronaut and being both of those things. I love that call out of getting excited to see what Jana's going to be up to and seeing that like kind of next pathway of your peers within Mission Spacewalker, and probably to also see the next generation of Mission Spacewalker after you guys graduate. I think that's pretty special what you guys have created. And I don't know, your EDI work's amazing, but like the projects that you guys have also done, the fact that they're all like national projects or just the scope of them are so cool. So that's going to be on my radar, is just to be like, what's the next generation of Mission Spacewalker? But thank you guys so much for talking about your guys' organization, a little bit about the space industry, and just all these cool intersections between mechanical engineering and robotics and sustainability, and just for being extremely lovely. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
One of our advisors, Chantel, she always says we're part of the Artemis generation. And Artemis is a Greek goddess. And that's what we're calling our next mission to Moon, the Artemis mission. So we're all part of that generation, which is kind of cool because she's a female goddess.
I love that. I've never heard that before, of the Artemis generation. And as being a kid that was way too into Greek mythology, I'm obsessed with that. That's fantastic. What a great name for your next project.
Well, it's the current mission to the moon is called the Artemis mission.
I didn't know.
So we, like all amazing. Of us, the whole world is part of this Artemis generation. So it's pretty cool.
I had no idea. That's absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for bringing space to my attention far more than it usually is. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. We really enjoyed and thank you for giving us, like a platform to talk about our project.
Of course. Anytime. Anytime you want. If you want to come on the show, anytime. Yeah. But thank you guys for listening. This is the Smoko podcast, and we will see you next Wednesday with a new episode. Bye-bye for now.